Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Curtis Chang, and the Good Faith Podcast is a production of Redeeming Babel, and it's where friends who follow Jesus help each other make sense of the world. And one of our key friends here on the Good Faith Podcast, indeed, our founding friend, is David French, who helps us regularly make sense of our crazy world. David, welcome back to the Good Faith Podcast. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I'm super happy
we missed
to be
a
back.
month. Yeah,
We did miss a month. It was me. We missed the month that was like the craziest news cycle month. I can remember.
That's exactly why I wanted you back, because I agree. I felt like this has been a crazy summer, at least in this realm of world events, and I wanted very much to have you help me and help the listeners make sense of this crazy summer of 2024. And the format that I like to do this is in the old Dave Letterman top 10 list, except we're going to whittle it down to 5 for time. And we're going to do, for those folks who remember the old Dave Letterman show, he would do these top 10 lists and count backwards in that order. And so we're going to do the top 5 craziest things that happened in the summer of 2024 with David French. And we're going to start with number 5. David, what is number 5 on your list of crazy things of the summer 2024?
So we have astronauts stranded in space and nobody's talking about it.
That's, when you put this on the list, I had to Google and look it up. I hadn't realized what was going on.
I mean, okay, so they're not stranded like in an emergency type situation, like an Apollo 13 type situation. But for those who haven't followed, after many years, so the American space program right now is got a public and a private component and a public-private partnership. And so part of the public-private component is Boeing is developing its own space technology, and NASA has contracted with Boeing and SpaceX for the next phase of crewed spaceflight. And SpaceX is killing it, man. Like, their space capsule works. They're working on the Starship. Boeing fell behind by years and billions of dollars. And then finally, when the Boeing space capsule went up to the International Space Station, it sprung a leak.
Oh, no.
It sprung a propellant leak. And so they're sitting there trying to figure this out while these 2 astronauts, who were supposed to just be in the ISS for a few days, are just hanging out indefinitely. And it may come to be like the moment where SpaceX has to go rescue them. In fact, that is one of the plans. Now, Curtis, I'm not the biggest Elon Musk fan in the world, although I do appreciate SpaceX and Tesla as the products they've been able to create. But if I'm advising Elon Musk, you know what I'm telling him?
What are you telling him?
You fly up in that space capsule and bring the astronauts home yourself. But the thing that's also crazy about it, it's not just crazy because it's crazy, like in general, that we have these astronauts up there. There's a leak. It's a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft. People aren't quite sure it's going to work. But just, it's wild what happened to Boeing, Curtis. It's crazy. This is one of the great American companies.
Yeah, and it sprung a leak, and now we're like in a real live version of The Martian with a rescue attempt to get Matt Damon to rescue him. It is crazy. What does that say about? There's so many different ways that this is crazy, but obviously it's crazy, like you said, that we have this venerable established institution that like springs a leak in space. But also, like, let's just, for those of you, because I honestly was not tracking this story. So tell us why you think we're not tracking this story and why we should.
Well, I don't know if we necessarily should. I do think that we're not tracking it in part because for whatever reason, just there's only a small subset of Americans right now who are captivated by space travel and exploration and all of the, and I'm in part of that. I'm in that small group.
Okay.
So I'll do things like stay up till 2 a.m. to watch, the NASA launch of the Space Launch System, their new giant rocket.
Yeah.
Where I could see it at 2 a.m. from a beach on Miami, where it launches in Orlando. I'm a nerd. I like space flight, but there's only a very small segment of us that are really interested in this, which is it's kind of sad in my
Yeah.
view. But the other thing, because I do think there's something really good about this idea that
Yeah.
we want to reach out and we want to see and explore and
Yeah.
do new things. So there's a dynamism in space exploration that I think is really neat. But the other thing though, I'm actually really interested in the Boeing part of this, because
Mm.
if you followed Boeing at all over the last 5 years, you'll have noticed that of the major aviation companies, they have struggled.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a microcosm of our collapse in trust in
Yeah.
institutions. And so here
Like
you
we're not
have,
sure they can like keep the doors on planes without them blowing off of the fuselage, right? So that's
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
institutional trust issue right there. So
Yeah. So, and there's the Boeing whistleblowers, and it's
yeah.
just, so it's a crazy story that you would have this company that is in duress, and then its comeback, its great moment to come back is we're entering space with our $8 billion space capsule,
Yeah.
and it springs a helium leak. And it's just kind of indicative of what's happening to some of our institutions. Now,
Yeah.
other institutions are better functioning. Obviously, there's a SpaceX that can go get them,
Yeah.
so it's not like everything is falling apart,
Yeah.
but it is, there's something about that story that it just feels both weird and indicative at the same time.
Yeah, I want to just expand on that a little bit. So one, I think this points to how important it is to have institutions functioning, trusted, and reliable, because we just can't do great things as a
Right.
human race without institutions. By definition, any endeavor that is truly like glorious
Mm-hmm.
is going to involve people working together on a mass scale, and that's what institutions are. That's they
Yeah.
bring people together to work on things that are glorious, and in terms of what institutions are intended by God to do. So it is pointing to the need for us to actually keep investing in, looking for, paying attention to institutional well-being, stability, trust, and also because as human beings, we can't reflect God's glory aptly without human institutions. This is a regular theme here on the Good Faith Podcast. The second thing that I want to talk about is your intuition, your feeling, David, that there's something really good here, noble, almost inspiring in lifting of the human spirit that we actually should be paying more attention to. And it's sad that we've sort of not been paying attention to. And David, I for the summer, in this middle of this crazy summer 2024, for my own devotions, I've been going through the Psalms. That's been my regular
Mm-hmm.
go-to text for my own prayer life. And I was called to mind when I saw your little item about the astronauts, the Psalm 8. And Psalm 8 says, the psalmist says, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him?" And then it goes on, verse 6, "Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands and have put all things under his feet." And the vision there of the psalmist is that, like the heavens, the stars, space, that is part of the work of God's fingers. And yet, God has put humanity as his regent, as his manager, to actually have that glory such that they have dominion. And dominion is that a word to say to manage, to name, to discover, to care for the works of your hands. So even space, because he said space is part of the works of your hands, and yet man is it's part of that dominion God has given to man to actually exercise this sort of wise stewardship and management of, and put all things under humanity's feet. Like the fact that humanity has feet in space, like we literally have our feet in space, in the space station that's an expression of the vision of humanity for Psalm 8. And that is a glorious and honorable thing for humanity. That's one of the distinctives of humanity. I mean, the dolphins are not getting together to form institutions to actually go to space, right? Like that's, even though they're smart, they have high IQ, there's something about humanity. And I would say, even, when we think about artificial intelligence, like David, I think in our lifetime, we're going to have a sentient AI being. I think we're headed there. Okay.
It's
But
possible.
even that being is not going to have dominion. They're not going to be assigned by God to have dominion over the world. They're supposed to be under our dominion to help us actually exercise wise stewardship over
Wait a minute,
earth and the
Curtis.
space. Yeah.
You have obviously not spent enough time watching Star Trek Next Generation and the trial over Data's humanity.
Okay, let's not go there. Well, that's a different podcast topic. But David, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I think that's part of what you're feeling about, like, why aren't we paying more attention to this? Is because we need to reestablish touch with this glorious and honorable calling of humanity to exercise dominion over all of God's creation, which includes the heavens, the moon, and the stars.
Well, it's funny you raised that, because, Curtis, historically, actually, the American space program has created this sense of awe and wonder. Right. Yeah. So in Apollo 8, very famously, there was the reading of the Genesis story over,
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you can go Google it. It's on YouTube, the Genesis, Genesis 1, Apollo 8, talking about the creation.
Yeah.
And this sort of, when you're in the vastness of space, the awe and the wonder, and then you raise that verse from the Psalms, and that's exactly, Buzz Aldrin had a communion service on the moon's surface, on Apollo 11, and read that scripture. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? So that's Buzz Aldrin, on Apollo 11. So there is absolutely, and we all experience this also when we just do the things that we can do as normal human beings to experience the wonder of creation. Yeah. When I was on top of Mount Elbert during the pandemic, when I went with friends and we went and Mount Elbert's the highest mountain in the Colorado Rocky Range, the beauty of it, like when you're on the top of that mountain and the beauty of what you see, it is a spiritual experience. It's touching the transcendent. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, at least for me, almost instantly brings tears to your eyes, because you're just so moved by the wonder of it all. And I think diving into that wonder is, now there's ways it's all prideful and look at what we can do and all of this. Sure. There's a darker side of this, but there is a side of this that I think is wondrous, and it's diving into the wonder of creation and exploring and experiencing the wonder of creation. I think that is a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's a needful thing in this moment, because interestingly, as David, you and I work on the After Party project, we talk a lot about hope and humility. And it strikes me as part of this endeavor, the space endeavor, is hope. You're hopeful that you're going to discover something. You're hopeful that you can do great things. It's not a pessimistic spirit that launches these great expeditions. So it's hope, but it also then achieves or brings into touch this humility that comes from awe. And it's interesting. There's studies that show that one of the experiences that actually moderates political polarization, toxic animosity, actually is a common experience of awe. If you can give people an experience of awe, everybody, your sense is like, hey, our little petty divisions and hostilities and quarrels, they're like very small. It's just hard to get that worked up with them if you're standing beholding the Grand Canyon, or you're in the middle of a desert looking up and seeing the breadth of the canopy of the stars and its blazing glory. You're like, wait, what are we arguing about down here?
It's really, but, and then you try to go and experience the awe and wonder of it, and you spring a leak.
That's not good. That's
not good.
Okay, that's number 5. So astronauts stranded in space, lost in space. Number 4. What's number 4 on your crazy things of 2024 summer?
I'm just 2 words. Steph's 3.
Amen, brother.
So I want to unpack this. Of course, I shouldn't even have to unpack this, because every good faith listener's got to be in tune with, when I say Steph's 3, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Like a picture that should hang in the Louvre, which is Steph's fadeaway over Victor Wembanyama, who's like 7'20", and it's the 3 that clinched the Olympic gold medal for the American basketball team. And for me, it's not just that was so fun. It was one of those moments, and we rarely get them anymore, where you feel like everyone is on the same page.
Yes.
Everyone is having a great time. And then there's another intangible thing about this. Like, everybody loves Steph Curry.
Yeah.
And so it's like everybody loves Steph Curry. Everybody in America is rooting for the same team. Steph does
Yes.
something wondrous, a Steph thing that's just amazing. And sort of this, and it was so fun, this explosion of joy. And it's also my stand-in for something else, Curtis, which is the Olympics writ large.
Yes.
To me, were a very joyful 2 weeks in the
Yeah.
United States.
Totally.
We as an American people had fun with it. And it felt like the first time in a while we kind of had fun together, if that makes sense.
I think that's such a great take. Like David, you, me, and a bunch of our other friends were on this text thread, and just the joy, like, we're just texting each other, Steph, and I think your take about that, it brought people together, brought this nation together. And it may be the last remaining event that we can truly come together as a country, because even regular sports events now we're divided, of course, by team rivalries and so forth. But the Olympics as a country brings us together. And again, like you said, Steph, like such a non-polarizing figure with Team USA. Again, I'm going to go to my summer reading list, David. Back to the Psalms.
All right.
Psalm 133. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers, when kindred dwell in unity. For there, verse 3, for there the Lord has commanded the blessing, life evermore. For there, the there that the Lord is talking about has commanded the blessing is unity. It's when his people are living in dwelling in unity. That's where the Lord commands his blessing. And I think the blessing of the Olympics was we were unified. We were actually the United States. And we have so few events that we can truly celebrate that together. I think there was something transcendent and lifting in that. I think you're exactly right that there is a blessing of fun that comes with that. And we really need that, David. It's I don't know. Can you think of anything else that even comes close to that as something that brings us together within that spirit of unity and fun?
Not recently. Yeah. And interestingly, I don't even think that more recent Olympics did it. So the Tokyo Olympics was a little bit drained of its energy because there were no crowds, right?
Yeah, COVID.
And then the London Olympics were a blast, but I felt like you were just sort of watching the Brits have a great time. Like that Team GB outperformed all expectations. I felt like I was watching England or Britain have a moment, Yeah. But there was something about this that just felt different. And I don't know, Curtis, maybe this is a take that could age so poorly. Basically, every time, like a pundit opens his mouth, you should begin with like the implied warning. This take could age poorly. But I feel like there's a change in the breeze a little bit in this country. I feel like people are actually wanting to be happy. And I don't know if
you mean drawing from my other text, the west wind is blowing on the fields of Pelennor? Is that right. What you're saying, David?
That's right. The cock crows. The sun is coming through the dark clouds.
Warning to everybody, we're going Tolkien here. So
we're going Tolkien. That's right. But no, I feel like, and this take could age so poorly. So sure, remind me of it if I'm wrong. But I just feel like the wind is changing, and it's interesting. Politics is often a trailing edge indicator, and I think that when you see the move of the Harris campaign away from sort of like save America from the dark devastation of Trump to no, let's just not go back there. And that joy thing that they're going for, I think, is a trailing edge indicator of the shift in the wind. I think that these are shrewd politicians who are saying the wind has shifted. And so they're trying to grab onto that a little bit. I could be totally wrong about this. I could be totally wrong, but there was just something about that whole thing that felt wind shifty, that we just were happy. And it also in a surprising time, because we were just coming out of the awfulness of some of the other things we'll talk about here in a minute.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just put it down as crazy because A, the shot was crazy. B, the atmosphere was just a ton of fun. And then C, I think, is there something going on? Is there a change in the wind? I don't know. So I just thought I'd raise it.
Well, that's something for us, I think, to pray for as a
Yeah.
people. You know, uh, the winds do need to shift, and I really believe prayer is how we help shift the winds. It is
Mhm.
the invisible in the spirit of the age that we are called to spiritually engage with. And I do think praying for this on the Psalm 133, to pray for how good and pleasant it is when the kindred dwell in unity, for there the Lord has commanded the blessing, life forevermore. If we can pray more in that spirit, that we are all aspiring, hungering, longing for that, that's got to infect and infuse sort of what we do, like how we carry
Mhm.
ourselves, how we talk to other people. And yeah, I that's a great insight, and I'm going to pray for that. That is the spirit of the age.
We'll see if it's a great insight. It might be like a foolish hope, but I don't know. There's something in the last few weeks that have made me feel as if there's a change in the air, and the Olympics really was the thing that
Yeah.
stood out to me.
Well, maybe one way to put it would be, let's not make that take be a predictive take, but be an aspirational take, right? Like that
Great.
that's
Yes.
actually what we're trying for, we're longing for.
I love that. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, absolutely.
Things we've talked about: astronauts lost in space, Steph's magnificent three, and now we're going to go to a little darker place, a lot darker place.
Yeah.
Number three, David.
Yeah. So number 3 is the Ukrainian invasion isn't the right word. Incursion,
Yeah.
attack into Russia is number 3, for only 9 million reasons. So
Well,
number,
but before you go on to, it's sort of like the space story in the sense that many people are not paying attention to this. It's
yeah.
not getting the attention that it deserves. So unpack it. Why does this belong in the top five?
Yeah. So there's so many layers to this. So one layer here is it's just empirically stunning that Ukraine is able to take 400 square miles of Russian territory in 2 years into this war, after they have suffered so many losses, after the failure of their counteroffensive. It shows that Ukraine is sort of endlessly inventive, bold. This is a gamble. It could really backfire. But if you had talked to basically any expert in the world on February 23rd, 2022, the day before the Russian invasion, and say, hey, guess what, guys? This first round is going to fail. Ukraine is going to be in a slugfest with Russia. And 2 years into this thing, Ukraine's going to actually take 400 square miles of Russian territory.
Zero. Nobody would have made that.
Nobody.
Yeah.
And the most correct person I have talked to is about the war period is a source that I've had in the Pentagon for a while, who was the only person I talked to before the war who correctly predicted that Russia would pay a really high price in its invasion. And if I had talked to him on February 23rd, who was optimistic, like this would not be on the bingo card. And so this is, in my view, and I shared this. I've had 2 long podcast discussions with good friends, one Jonah Goldberg at the Dispatch and one Charlie Cook at National Review, about my decision to say I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. And one of the things I said is the most important story in the world, aside from if something happens to democracy in the United States of America, like that would be the most important story in the world. But the most important story in the world, aside from the possibility of dramatic democratic degradation in the US, is the Ukraine war. 100 years from now, historians will be talking about the Ukraine war because it's one of those hinge moments in history.
Yeah.
And so we're watching a key moment in a war that is a hinge moment all by itself. And so I just wanted to highlight it as this is a constant reminder that something incredibly significant is happening in the world, directly relevant to our lives, and we're constantly being surprised at how this is unfolding.
And let's unpack that a little bit, because I think it's helpful for people who haven't been following it to sort of understand what probably is the strategic calculus going on here. The best I can understand it in terms of the strategy here is, once again, drawing back to my summer texts, not the Psalms, but Tolkien. I'm reading this. My summer is I'm going through the Lord of the Rings again. This is akin to like the last chapters of the Lord of the Rings, where the captains of the West mount this last sort of throw to
Yeah.
march on the gates of Mordor in order to draw off pressure and attention and focus of Sauron from Frodo as they're marching to Mount Doom. That's probably more for people who don't read Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's kind of like that. My understanding is Ukraine is trying to relieve pressure from other threatened lines by going on the offensive and putting pressure on Russia to redeploy its forces from other areas. Is that your read of what's going on, David?
Yeah. So I talked to several, military analysts, including people who've been just following the daily rhythm of the battle since the start of the war. And they had two or three alternatives. One alternative, probably the most likely alternative, is just what you described, which is we're going to take ground that is unacceptable for us to have. You're going to have to divert forces. And we're going to, when you divert forces, not only is that going to impair your offensive in Eastern Ukraine, we're going to, because you're going to be attacking prepared positions that we've prepared, you're going to take huge losses. As one person said, this is a defensive war. And what this was a little bit of an offensive so that they could go back on the defensive and inflict a lot of pain on Russia. So that's one. The other one is the bargaining chip theory, which says, okay, there's been some tentative discussions, maybe, kind of, sort of, that there might be some peace negotiations. But if Ukraine is going to negotiate, it has to negotiate from a position of strength. So others say, no, this cannot be. This actually makes negotiation more remote because Putin cannot abide having those troops on Russian soil. So therefore, there won't be negotiations until after the troops are ejected, if they can be. Then the third thing that folks talked about was just quite simply, there's independent value in seizing the initiative.
Yeah.
Making the Russians react to you. And when you put somebody in a reactive mode, often that will play out in unpredictable ways. So, for example, could it put pressure on the Putin regime that the war has, quote, come home? Who knows? But you're making them react. And when you see them react, they don't have the initiative. And so it could be, as simple as we're going to seize the initiative in this context and see what happens. But it's a risk. It's a gamble. I mean, we could be talking about this in next month as being a disaster. But as of right now, it has put Russia on the back foot. And, Ukraine, gosh, to its credit, has been incredibly inventive in figuring out ways, even as the war has stalemated, even as sort of Russia is kind of grinding forward in this just horrific way. Even then, as they're making Russia pay just an incredibly high price for every yard of territory. And that's, again, an unexpected thing.
Well, I want to pick up on that theme of unexpected. Again, I'm reading everything through the text I'm reading. It's like, I read the Lord of the Rings. I'm like, man, the Ukrainians are like the hobbits. Like, who would have thought that this little hardy group could have lasted this long and much less taken the offensive? Like, it is unexpected. And maybe that's the larger theme for us to just unpack a bit about how, and you've said this already in terms of how dangerous it is for pundits to make predictions. Really, we can expand that to all of us, right? How dangerous it is for us to assume we know where things are going to go. We know where history is going to go. That to make the mistake of taking what is currently right now and immediately projecting forward a set of inevitable events that must flow. But like history has shown over and over that you don't know, things can really change on a dime, and that ought to really give us, I think, to return to those same themes, both hope and humility. I mean, it should give us hope for when we think, wow, these are dark times. And let's face it, a lot of us feel like we are living amidst dark times. We should have hope. Just because the times are dark now does not mean that it inevitably will roll on forward like this forever. Winds can turn, tides can turn. And it also should give us humility. Like, we just don't know. We cannot know with certainty how events will play out. So that feels like an important lesson for us to embrace out of this Ukraine war.
Yeah. And also courage creates opportunities.
Yeah.
That, one of the things that we have seen in Ukraine is just a level of courage that's almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
And courage inspires. If it weren't for Ukraine's courage, we wouldn't still be providing all that aid. Right. The Europeans wouldn't be providing all that aid. Yeah. So that courage made the aid possible. The aid makes the courage. I'm trying to look for the courage made the aid possible. The aid makes the courage effective.
Right. Right.
And so, there's this thing that happens when people watch someone else rise to the occasion. And I remember when I was in Ukraine, I was speaking to a person who had fought in the Battle of Kyiv, the battle to save Kyiv in the first weeks of the war. And he was a guy who was one of those guys in a trench or in a foxhole with a javelin missile and an AK-47 and no military training.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Waiting for a Russian armored column to head down the street for you. And he talks about how in those first days, there was this sense of uncertainty that was rippling through the ranks, even though people were volunteering. Yeah. And there was this sense that, wait a minute, their rumor spread through that Zelensky had left, that Zelensky had gone. He was leaving for exile. And there was sort of this wavering. And if the government isn't going to stay, are we going to?
Sure.
And then, there was that famous Zelensky, I'm here, the defense minister, that moment.
Yeah.
And the person I talked to was like, things changed at that moment. Like, if he's not
the
going
wind
anywhere,
shifted. They're right there.
The wind shifted. If he's not going anywhere, we're not going anywhere. And that's what courage does. It inspires other people to exhibit courage, but cowardice often tells you, I don't want to be the last one, like holding the bag. I don't want to be the last sucker here,
Yeah.
And so I just think it's a crazy story on its own, wild that it's happening, and it's also inspiring in some pretty profound ways.
Right. And that it doesn't happen unless a person, Zelensky, had made the courageous step that, again, turns the tide, shifts the wind. That's such a great word for us in our own various spheres, in our own little corners of the Shire that we are trying to be faithful in, that the power of courage, that like wherever each of us are standing and have been assigned to defend the good, to preserve the right in our own institutions, in our own communities, in our own families, in our own networks and so forth. I love that, David, the power of courage that actually creates new opportunities that can't be imagined in that moment, that courage itself creates the opportunities, and courage itself, even one person's courageous stuff, sometimes can be the thing that shifts the tide, that turns the wind. That's
Absolutely.
Really critical for us to live as people who know that's part of the dominion that God has assigned humanity to exercise in the world, is to be those people who will, when the moment comes, do the right thing, do the hard thing, do the courageous thing. And that God can work through that. God spiritually can work through that moment, because God has designed how this to work is to work in cooperation with his human people that he's assigned to be co-regents of this world.
Yeah.
And so we need to play our part. We need to step up and play our part with courage and hope and humility. And that opens the door for God to do his work in the ways that only God can. And so I love that, David. Politics, that's a natural segue into number 2 on your crazy things that happened in summer 2024. What is it, David?
It's Joe Biden dropping out, but it's really everything around that. Okay. So it's really starting with June 27th and the debate.
Yeah.
Going up through Biden dropping out. I don't think, if you're young, you just don't have a perspective on how weird all this is. Like I I was talking. I had a TV hit not long ago, and somebody was asking me. The host was asking me sort of my prognostication, what this means going forward, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, the closest analog is 1968, but in
I was
that
just going to
one,
say that, right? Yeah. Summer, summer
Lyndon
68.
Johnson,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, Lyndon Johnson dropped out after one primary,
Yeah.
and then they had a whole contest. Right? This is he has. Let's just think for 5 seconds. I was watching the debate with a bunch of former Obama folks. I was in an event in Chautauqua, New York, and we were all watching, and every one of us was gobsmacked. We could not believe what we were seeing as far as like the halting speech. And I part of me worried, is he having a health event? Is Biden having a health event right now?
Jeez.
You
Yeah.
know, and then it turns into this days, weeks long drama that we've never seen before, where it's like a sitting president
Yeah.
is being basically told by his party to not seek reelection. And he's going, I'm in. And then like Nancy Pelosi saying, he has a decision to make. And then he's like, what do you mean? I'm in. And Pelosi's like, well, we'll see what he ultimately decides.
Jeez.
and it was wild. And then for him to just pull right back out. And then the instantaneous move from him to Kamala Harris. I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
Did not anticipate that. And so all of this is just wildly unusual. So on the one hand, you look at the Trump campaign that's really kind of faltered since, in the last 3 weeks. And you say, why weren't you better prepared? And then in another sense, you back up and say to them, why weren't you better prepared for an event that has never happened before in American history? Oh, okay. Now I can begin to see why.
Yeah.
But I've never seen this series of events then lead to such a dramatic reversal of political fortune to the point where now the election's a toss-up. Whereas, 4 weeks ago, it was a lot. When you look at the Republican convention, you felt like you're watching a victory celebration before the victory.
Yeah.
It is one of the more bizarre, unanticipated, wild turns of events I've ever seen.
Well, let's try to pull back and get some historical perspective. I mean, certainly, I think in recent memory, even recent decades, I can't come up to anything like this. I mean, the closest analog, like you said, is LBJ dropping out and all of the other turmoil happening in the summer of '68. That's probably maybe the closest modern analogy. But really, just trying to think. Then, okay, let's step out, just both in terms of outside the U.S., but also longer in terms of history. This phenomenon of leaders voluntarily exiting, is something that I think is really important for us to actually highlight, because what people forget when they think about leadership is they think about the ascent of a leader, they think about the leader's impact while they're at their acme of their power, but we forget that actually how a leader leaves sometimes can leave a very lasting legacy. And that's true not just in the political realm, but it's true in organizations and corporations and business and nonprofits, that the leader's last sort of, stage, and then how a leader chooses to exit, really can have long-term ramifications for good or for ill for that particular institution. And I was just thinking about this. I was like, in terms of American history, well, like George Washington, of course, is the obvious example we can go back to in his decision not to run for, an additional term when, frankly, he probably could have made a bid to be king, in terms of his stature at that time, and how that shapes sort of this American tradition over centuries of a peaceful transfer of power and lays the groundwork for that. And of course, Washington was following an even more ancient example with Cincinnatus of back in the Roman Empire, 458 BC, where he does that. And, of course, Washington sets up the Society of Cincinnatus, like that. He's clearly following a historical pattern when he does that, to say a great leader knows when to step down, especially in order to signal that this is not a move towards tyranny. I was thinking Mandela, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second term, 1999. Another sort of his, for South Africa, the Washington moment example of where he's seeking to have a peaceful transfer of power. He's not going to be the dictator. Pope Benedict, 2013, realizing his own human frailty and sickness means that he can't lead the Catholic Church and chooses voluntarily to step down, I think would be another analogy. It's something, David, don't you think, for all of us in leadership to reflect on, like that's part of our faithful carrying of the dominion mandate from God, is
Oh,
when to lay down the dominion that's been
yeah.
handed for us and when it's time, right?
Well, it's very interesting because we have this really interesting moment in American history where the baby boom generation, which this is a modern generation with long life expectancy, also with a changing economy, so that an 80-year-old on an assembly line was not a thing, right? But an 80-year-old can still type on a laptop, right? And can
Right.
continue to work. And so we have longer life expectancy. We have more sort of career stamina because the nature of work changing. So we really do have a situation where you've got an awful lot of people who are really in advanced age who are maintaining powerful positions in government. I mean,
Mm. Mm.
and powerful positions in throughout the world and in
Yeah.
the economy. And it's interesting. You're talking about a woman who's older than Joe Biden was indispensable in getting Joe Biden to step aside, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is wild. And what I am seeing is very few people have figured out how to handle this transition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wrote about this some time ago. And one of the things that I think is at work here is the unwillingness to let go
Yeah.
that a lot of people have is a sign of the workism in our society. Because I think that if you look at how a large number of people define what is the good life nowadays,
Yeah.
work is often number one.
Yeah.
And so if you're in a culture where what you do defines you more than, say, being a grandparent does, or a parent does, or whatever, then hanging on becomes how you maintain your very identity and sense of
That's right.
self.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of this is related to that workism. You are your work.
Yeah.
And I was telling my kids, I said, okay, guys, here's the deal. If you all three agree I need to hang it up, I'm hanging it up, man. Like you get to tell me when I've lost too much on my fastball, right?
Yeah.
But it's easy to say. Now it's harder to do. But I do think that this is a sign of workism, that this is what defines me. And that makes it very difficult to give up.
And gives you value and worth in the
Mm-hmm.
eyes of others, especially, I'm reminded of an article I read, an interview with Lorne Michaels, the executive producer of Saturday Night Live, who is turning 80. To be an 80-year-old running a weekly live show is it's something. And he said, he was very clear. He's like, when you're not in a role like this, people stop returning your phone calls. And I think that's something that's about that, right? It's like, I'm not going to be valued. I'm not going to be treated with the same set of response, value, worth, respect. If I lose and I voluntarily step down from this power, people are not going to return my phone calls. But that is such the moment when a leader demonstrates they truly are not leading for themselves and their own ego and so that their phone calls get returned, but rather out of service, rather in order to reflect this proper God imaging dominion over the world. That includes relinquishing power at the right time in the right moment. And it's something that all of us, I think, especially for those of us who are listeners, who are facing that kind of decision point, or should be facing that decision point. And it could be age related, but it could also be just, not age related, but just that your skill set is no longer the skill set that your institution most needs. You were good for an earlier stage of an organization, but now the stage organization needs a different skill set. And to have that maturity and wisdom and humility, to have that self-awareness, to recognize that and say, I am going to step down before I'm forced out, before a crisis emerges, before my organization's version of Nancy Pelosi has to send signals to me. Like, I'm going to actually proactively do that. Or set things up the way you talked about with your family, set things up so that I'm getting the feedback, the honest feedback, so I'll know when that moment comes. It's such an important part of leadership, and it's one that we overlook, to our great detriment.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. And you know what's sad? And I say that I have an aspiration of being responsible and stepping down,
Yeah.
because I say that with all due humility, because I have been in the room with people who've been making their transition plan
Yeah.
years in advance and then didn't do it.
Yeah.
So I've seen that occur. I've seen that unfold. And I have such respect for the people who made a transition plan and kept to it. So, for example, just, to shout out my former boss at Alliance Defending Freedom, Alan Sears. Alan Sears, 10 years before he stepped aside, was telling people, I'm going to step aside in 10 years. And he did it. And he did it gracefully. And he handed the reins over to another person, stepped back. And it was such a model, but he was a guy who dispositionally was a humble guy. I mean, that, unlike a lot of sort of founders, he didn't have that sort of founder syndrome of everything has to reflect upon me.
Yeah.
And so, you could actually see the seeds for his good decision laid in the humility he conducted, how he conducted himself with humility throughout his career that I saw. And so it wasn't surprising to me that he made the transition plan and kept it. But there are some other people who made transition plans. But also, Curtis, in the moment, I thought, are you going to be able to do this? Are you really, you've been a rock star for a really long time, Mick Jagger's still out there touring. You're going to want to keep,
We've gone through 4 crazy things. We've talked about stranded astronauts, Steph's 3, Biden stepping down, or Ukraine, then Biden stepping down. And we are now, I guess if I had the right sound effects, we are out to the drum roll now for the top craziest thing that happened in the summer of 2024. David, roll it out.
Well, it's got to be the assassination attempt on Trump. On so many levels. So we talked about the Boeing institutional failure.
Yeah.
They've got nothing on the Secret Service. I mean, that was unbelievable to me that he was able to get that close with that clear. I mean, it's gobsmacking to me. So that's a shocker. Number 2, it really is interesting, Curtis. I was talking to somebody about this and I said, we always discount the bullet dodged more than we should. Yeah. And so when the bullet is dodged, we were kind of like, whew, and then we kind of go on with our lives.
Yeah.
But if the bullet connected, and the difference between dodging and connecting here is micro fractions of an inch.
Yeah.
The bullet connects, then everything changes.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be a proper response that is not, whew, glad that was a miss. And that is also not acting as if it connected, because that has real world ramifications that you don't have now, but takes the gravity of what occurred properly and responds to the gravity of what occurred properly. And I think it's good that the head of the Secret Service resigned, but it is just astonishing on so many levels how close we came to an event that would have shattered the Trump family, would have shattered American politics, possibly could have shattered the country, depending on how the reaction spiraled out from it. And now we don't even talk about it.
Well, your number 2 overshadowed number 1, right? Biden's stepping down completely overshadowed number 1. And you're saying, no, we got to really pay attention to number 1. You've put it number 1 precisely because you said that there's something about where our politics has arrived at that we need to steer at to recognize the stakes of what's going on here. So, and I think what I'm hearing you say is like, look, if that had happened, something fundamental about our very democracy gets shattered. And maybe just to articulate that, to step back for a moment, let's remember when we talk about modern democracy, modern Western liberal democracy, That was an invention. It was a human invention led by Christians to solve a Christian problem. And the Christian problem was we were killing each other. We were killing each other over like doctrinal differences.
Yeah.
Our politics, modern politics of, medieval Europe was defined by Catholics and Protestants and other factions using political means of warfare to kill each other over doctrinal means. And so Christians recognize this. We can't live like this. Grotius, Locke, all these people were like, we got to come up with a different way. So modern liberal democracy evolved out of a Christian failing and recognizing that failing. A lot of Christian Western philosophers recognizing failing. It's like, we've got to figure out a different way. And that really is the intellectual roots of modern Western democracy, is like, we need a different way to resolve or at least hold our differences without killing each other. And so the violence, why we need to steer at number one, this event, is because that is a direct threat to democracy, right? That, like, more than Trump himself, and you and I both agree, Trump is a threat to democracy, but a killing of Trump and a justification of that would have been a much more lethal blow to democracy. Is that, basically, that's, I think, what you're saying, right, David?
Oh, it would have been unbelievably traumatic to our nation, and traumatic in the normal sense that, when we look back and we think of the assassinations that have occurred in previous eras of American history, those are all deeply traumatic.
Yeah.
But you throw it on top of a tinderbox of a country.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more dangerous. And so you have a situation where we almost started to enter into that 1968 world of assassination. And then the other thing is, we can't look at that and just say, wow, well, Trump dodged a bullet, literally, and we all as Americans dodged a bullet, and glad that's over. No, that's an alarm bell.
Yeah.
That's an alarm bell that our politics have reached a point where someone took a shot. We don't know all the motivations. We don't know the motivations for it, but someone took a shot at a presidential nominee. We have 80 plus more days to go in an extremely, extremely, extremely tense environment. And this should be an alarm bell to the Secret Service that they have to, and it also should be an alarm bell for us. I wrote this right afterwards, and I said, you can criticize Donald Trump. Don't demonize him. Yeah. Don't devalue his humanity. Don't devalue the humanity of his supporters. I disagree with Trump. That is no secret at all. However, when I saw what happened, my heart went out to him and to his family. I can't even imagine that sense of facing your own mortality in that moment like that, the fear of it, the terror of it, all of that. We have to be able to, I wrote a very short blog post right after it was over, and I said, there's never been a better time to love your enemies. And that includes your MAGA friends and relatives who have been maybe driving you crazy some over the last few years, or vice versa. If you're a strong Trump supporter and the resistance folks have been driving you nuts, this is a reminder to me that we have to recognize our shared humanity. We have to. And there are ways, and circle back to the after party, you can disagree strongly with a person without dehumanizing them. It's possible. It's not even hard. It's actually easy.
Well, I amen to that. And David, on the note of our common shared humanity, that we share human life together with every other human living person, and that we ought to celebrate, take joy in life, in human life lived and lived well together. You have some great news to share from your own family life about life and the celebration of life.
Yes. Well, yesterday, Nancy finished 283 days of cancer treatments, and she is cancer-free. She is, she's got like a couple of follow-up visits to, sort of dot the I's and cross the T's, but all the treatments are done. No more radiation, no more chemo, no more surgery. She'll have to do scans going forward, like a lot of cancer survivors have to do, but it's a huge moment. And, a lot of people say, how are you celebrating? Well, here's the reality of cancer treatment. when it ends is after it has cumulatively kind of worn you down. So she rung the bell after chemo at really one of the lowest physical points of the whole ordeal. And so she was able to sort of summon the smile for that one, but man, she was rough, feeling rough. Radiation also has a cumulative effect. And so she rang the bell when she was not feeling great. But thankfully she'll bounce back a lot faster from this than the chemo. But she's been a warrior. I mean, just the thing is, the term cancer survivor has a whole additional meaning to me, because I'd always sort of been of the mindset, well, what you mean when you say cancer survivors, you mean, well, I lived, the person who's a cancer survivor quite literally is alive when the cancer could have taken their lives, but they also survived the treatment, the ordeal. I mean, it is a slog. It is hard. And so even people who walked through cancer where the odds were very good for them, that it wasn't going to be fatal, they've been through hell and back to get to that point. And I have just an absolute appreciation for that I did not have before.
Well, we have appreciation, gratitude, and we will continue to pray for Nancy's recovery, that she can return to all the great things she does in the world, including terrorizing pickleball opponents on the courts of Franklin, Tennessee. And we will look forward to that. David, it's been great to reconnect after a summer apart and revisit with you and try to make a little sense together of the craziness of summer 2024. Thank you, David, for being with us.
Well, it's always a joy to be here. And Curtis, we get to be together in person.
Very soon. We're going to be together
very
in
soon.
Tennessee. We'll tell
unless
listeners
somebody
about
cancels
that.
It. Yeah.
Let's not go down that road. All right, listeners, thank you for joining David and me in this conversation. And we are so grateful that you've joined us in this sense-making regular thing that we do here. And we look forward to you joining us again. Please, in the meantime, leave a review on wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps us to hear from you and helps other people to hear about the podcast. And next week, we'll see you once again around the campfire.